First story, 2000. I was traveling alone through the Atacama Desert, Chile, back in 2000. It was supposed to be a peaceful trip, a break from everything. I had been on a few hikes before, so I was used to the isolation, but that night was different. The stars looked closer than I'd ever seen them before, almost like they were alive. The air felt heavier, and there was this silence. It was as if the desert had swallowed all sound. I had set up camp a bit off the main path. The ground was dry, cracked, and the only thing moving was the occasional wind, kicking up tiny dust clouds. I wasn't expecting anything strange to happen, let alone what I experienced. I remember lying on my back looking up at the sky when I saw it. At first I thought it was a plane, but it didn't have any blinking lights. It wasn't moving in a straight line either. It was an intense, almost blinding light, not white, but more like a sharp blue, like something that doesn't belong in the natural world. My heart started pounding, but I couldn't look away. Before I could even move or process what I was seeing, everything around me started to go dark. Not in the sense of night falling, no, it was more like the light itself was pulling everything into its gravity. I felt this overwhelming pull, and next thing I knew, I was no longer on the desert floor. The next thing I remember is being inside something. It wasn't a room exactly. It felt more like I was suspended in this place where nothing really made sense. The walls weren't walls at all. They were more like a mesh of soft light, shifting constantly. There was no floor, no ceiling, just a strange, endless expanse of glowing, pulsating light. I tried to move, but I couldn't. My body felt numb, and I felt paralyzed. Then I saw them, the beings. At first, they seemed blurry, like I wasn't supposed to focus on them. But as they came closer, I could see them clearly. They had skin that shimmered, almost metallic, with a smoothness that seemed unnatural. Their faces were like nothing I'd ever seen, with no real definition of features. Just these eyes, huge, dark, and without pupils. There was no expression, no emotion in their faces. They just were. A cold shiver ran down my spine, but at the same time, I couldn't move away. They came closer, surrounding me. There was this thick silence, but it didn't feel silent. It felt loud. It was like my whole body was vibrating with something, a frequency that was completely alien to me. My mind screamed for escape, but I couldn't even scream. I couldn't speak. Then one of them reached out toward me. It wasn't like a human touch. It was more of an impression on my skin, as if something were pressing into me from the inside out. There was no pain, but the feeling was so invasive that I couldn't handle it. My head started to ache. Suddenly, I was aware of something in front of me. A screen, or maybe some kind of projection, flickered into existence. It wasn't a screen like we have on Earth. It was alive, shifting, almost organic in the way it moved. The images started flashing on it, planets, but not just our planets. There were so many, solar systems, galaxies, nebulae, places I didn't recognize. But they felt familiar, like my mind already knew them. I couldn't understand what they meant, but it was like my brain was being flooded with knowledge. I could feel their meaning deep down inside me, but there was no way to process it. They weren't speaking to me with words. It was like they were showing me images, feelings, impressions, stuff I should understand but couldn't. The overwhelming sensation of knowing something I couldn't grasp consumed me. The more I tried to focus, the more fragmented it became. Their presence became more intense, almost suffocating, like they were waiting for me to get it, but I couldn't. The next thing that happened is almost impossible to explain. It was like time was moving differently inside that place. Everything around me felt both slow and fast at the same time. I could feel a pressure building up inside my chest, like something was about to crack open in my mind. It was terrifying, but there was also a strange sense of calm. The beings never spoke, but I understood that they weren't trying to harm me. It felt like they were studying me, probing my thoughts, and maybe even my soul, if such a thing exists. I'm not sure how long I was there. Minutes, hours. It felt like both an eternity and an instant. I tried to focus on one of the planets that flashed in front of me. It was a deep purple with swirling clouds and oceans that shimmered under some unknown light. I could almost feel the temperature of the air there, and I swear I could hear a sound, a hum, like a low frequency that resonated in my bones. The sensation was so strong that I felt like I was there, standing on that planet, watching the sky turn as its twin suns set. But it wasn't real. It was all just a display, a simulation or a vision, something my mind couldn't fully comprehend. The next thing that hit me wasn't just the feeling of being somewhere else, it was the sense of connection. And that's what freaked me out the most. These beings were not strangers to me. It's hard to explain, but I felt like I had known them for a long time. Their presence felt familiar, almost comforting, like an old memory I couldn't quite recall. They weren't just showing me these images. They were communicating with me on some level, not with words, but through sensations, emotions, and thoughts that felt like they were my own. But not really. I felt their intentions, but I couldn't interpret them. It was as if I was on the edge of understanding something massive, something about the universe, about everything, but I just couldn't reach it. I wanted to scream, to break through that barrier of confusion, but I couldn't. I was just there, floating in this strange reality, caught between fear and curiosity. The beings kept circling me, always watching, but they didn't feel threatening. They just were. It wasn't until later, when I tried to process everything that happened, that I realized how overwhelming that feeling of connection was. It was like they knew me, and in some bizarre way, I knew them. The experience suddenly shifted. I don't know how it happened, but one moment I was still trapped in this confusing, light-filled space, and the next thing I knew, I was back in the desert. But it wasn't the same desert I'd left. Everything was distorted, like I had been dropped back into the world, but something had shifted. The sand beneath me felt wrong. The air was too cold, too dry. I could see my breath, which didn't make sense for the desert. And the stars, they weren't where they were supposed to be. They were scattered across the sky, like they had been rearranged. The world felt off, like everything around me had been altered just slightly enough to make me question whether I'd ever really left. I was shaking, my heart pounding in my chest, but I had no time to process what had just happened. My body felt weak, drained, and my head was spinning. I tried to stand, but my legs gave out from under me. When I finally managed to get to my feet, I stumbled toward where my tent should have been. But it was gone. The desert stretched out in front of me, endless and barren. I was completely alone. I don't know how long I was wandering, lost in a daze, but I eventually stumbled upon a small, isolated road that I vaguely recognized. My legs felt like jelly, and my mind was a mess. Nothing made sense. I kept trying to piece everything together, but the memories felt disjointed, like broken fragments that couldn't fit into a single picture. The pain in my head was unbearable, as if something had been pulled from my brain and left a gaping void behind. My body was weak, my movements sluggish. I could barely keep my balance as I walked down the road, praying I'd find someone, anyone, to explain what had happened. But I didn't. The desert was still silent, like nothing had changed at all. No one passed by. No one was around. I felt like I was the only person left in the world, stranded in the aftermath of something I couldn't understand. Every time I tried to recall the events, it was like a fog washed over the memories, pushing them further out of reach. I knew something had happened, something real, but I couldn't grasp it. I could still feel their presence, the strange beings in my mind, pulling at my thoughts. But it was all fading, slipping away into nothingness. By the time I made it to a small local town, I was physically drained and completely disoriented. I could barely explain what had happened to me. I kept muttering to the few people I encountered, but none of them seemed to understand. Their eyes were blank, as if they couldn't even begin to process the words coming out of my mouth. I couldn't blame them. How could anyone believe me? I wouldn't have believed it either if I hadn't been there. The more I tried to explain, the more frustrated I became. People tried to help, but there was nothing they could do. I felt like I was becoming a ghost, fading into the background of this world, unable to connect to it. There was this lingering sense inside me, like something had been permanently imprinted on my brain. I could understand things I never could before. Concepts, distant stars, planets I didn't know, but they were all in my head. Images and knowledge that weren't mine. My mind was stretched in a way I couldn't explain, but it hurt. The pain never stopped. No one believed me, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the emptiness, the feeling of something deeply profound lost to me. It was as if I was missing a part of myself that had been taken from me without a trace. Over the following weeks, I tried to live my life as best as I could. I returned home to England, hoping that being around familiar places would help me make sense of what had happened, but it didn't. Every night, I felt that same sense of unease. The knowledge I couldn't explain gnawed at me, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw those beings, their dark, empty eyes, their cold, metallic skin, and their strange, silent presence. I couldn't escape them. It wasn't just in my dreams either. In broad daylight, I'd catch myself staring at the sky, feeling that same pull, that same sense of being watched, as if they were still out there, just beyond my reach. I'd forget something important, and then I'd remember suddenly with an overwhelming clarity. I didn't have any real answers. I just knew things I shouldn't have known. But the strangest part, I couldn't understand the message they'd tried to convey. I was left with this suffocating feeling of unfinished business, like something had been given to me, but it was locked away in some part of my mind that I couldn't access. It haunted me. It still does. Eventually, I reached out to a few UFO researchers and investigators, hoping to find some kind of explanation. I thought maybe someone out there could help me make sense of it. Maybe help me understand the knowledge I was carrying around that I couldn't explain, but even among them, I saw doubt. I could tell that they were intrigued by my story, but it was clear that I was different now. I could see the way they looked at me, almost as if I was a case study, a curiosity, but also a little afraid of what they were hearing. I told them everything. The blue light, the beings, the images, the feeling of connection. One of them tried to explain it away, said it was probably some kind of sleep paralysis or a dream. but I knew it wasn't that. I had never been so awake, so aware of what was happening, despite the surreal nature of it all. Another investigator said I might have been exposed to some kind of electromagnetic anomaly in the desert, which could cause hallucinations. But that didn't explain the connection I felt with the beings, or the knowledge that had been transferred into my mind. No, this wasn't just some weird episode or a result of the environment. There was something deeper, something far more unsettling. I think the hardest part of all of this has been trying to go back to normal life, if that's even possible. How do you go back to a life you no longer fit into? How do you explain the unexplainable to people who don't even want to hear it? How do you go to work, make small talk, act like everything's fine when you know the universe is so much bigger than any of us can comprehend? It's like my mind is stretched in all these directions, constantly pulling me back to what I saw, what I felt that night. I've tried to move on. I've tried to tell myself that it was just some strange experience, something my mind cooked up. But I know better. I can't shake it. I can't unknow the things I learned that night. Even though I've tried to erase the memory, I can't. It's burned into my mind, and I can still see it when I close my eyes. The beings, the images of planets, the connection, it's all still with me. Sometimes I'll catch myself staring into space, and for a moment I'll feel like they're out there again, watching me, waiting for me to understand whatever it is they were trying to show me. But I can't. I don't know what it means. I don't know if I ever will. As much as I've tried to put the whole experience behind me, I can't ignore the fact that I know things now. Things about the universe, things about other worlds, about life beyond our planet. I don't know how I know these things. I just do. I can close my eyes and see distant stars, feel the gravity of planets I've never been to, and sense things about the universe that most people can't even begin to comprehend. But with that knowledge comes an unbearable weight. It's like holding the entire cosmos inside your head and not being able to do anything with it. I don't have the answers. I'm not sure anyone does. But I can't stop thinking about the beings. What did they want? What were they trying to communicate? They didn't feel evil, but they didn't feel like anything good either. It was as if they were testing me, or maybe preparing me for something. But I'll never know. I've accepted that. The worst part, though, is that feeling of being pulled back. Sometimes it feels like I'm still connected to them. Like they're out there waiting for me to come back, to understand what they were trying to teach me. And that thought terrifies me more than anything. It's been years now since that night, but the feeling hasn't gone away. There are moments when I'll be driving, or just sitting at home, and it hits me out of nowhere. That same feeling, like I'm not alone, like someone or something is just on the edge of my perception, waiting for me to notice. It's almost like I can hear them sometimes, not with my ears, but in my mind. These echoes of thoughts that aren't mine, drifting through my head. It's subtle, and it's terrifying because I don't know if it's real, or if it's just the trauma of what happened messing with my head. But I know they're still out there. And every time I close my eyes, I wonder if they're watching me, waiting for me to come back. The more I think about it, the more it feels like I'm not supposed to understand, like they showed me just enough to make me feel connected to something far greater than this world, but never enough to truly comprehend it. It's a constant tension, like I'm holding my breath, waiting for something to happen. But what? What are they waiting for? Me to do? What's the point of all of this? I sometimes wonder if I'll ever find peace with it. I've tried to move on, tried to tell myself that it was just a strange experience, that I'm just one of the many people who claim to have been abducted, but deep down, I know it was real. Too real. And every time I talk about it, I feel like I'm losing a little more of myself, as if the more I try to explain it, the more I'm distancing myself from the person I used to be. I don't think I'll ever be the same, and part of me doesn't want to be. I'm not sure I could ever go back to living in ignorance, believing that everything in the universe fits neatly into our little box of understanding. It's like my eyes have been opened to something vast and terrifying, something that I can't unsee. But it's also something I'm not sure I want to understand. What if it's better to live in the dark? I don't know if I'll ever find answers. All I know is that I still feel them out there, and I don't think they'll ever leave me alone. They're waiting for something. Maybe they're waiting for me. As I sit here writing this, I don't expect anyone to truly believe me, and maybe I'm not even sure I believe it myself. But I can't deny what happened. I can't deny the memories that keep resurfacing in my mind, the strange knowledge that still haunts me. The beings, those things are real, and they're out there. I don't know what their purpose was, and I don't know why it happened to me. I just know it did, and I know that I'll never forget it. That night, that feeling, it's still with me. The universe is bigger than I ever imagined, and whatever those beings wanted, whatever they were trying to show me, I don't think I'll ever fully understand. But I've come to accept that. I'm just a small piece of something much larger. And maybe that's what scares me the most, the fact that I'll never be the same, and the fact that I'm still out here trying to figure out what it all means. I don't know if I ever will. Maybe I'll never have the answers, but they'll always be out there. Second story, 2003. I had just finished a long day driving through the barren stretch of the Atacama desert. The sun had set hours ago, and the night had swallowed the landscape in complete darkness. I was used to the solitude, used to being alone on these long trips for work. But tonight felt different. Something in the air was off. I can't explain it exactly, but it felt like the desert itself was holding its breath. I parked my car off the main road, near a cluster of rocks where I often stopped to rest during my travels. The vastness of the desert stretched out in all directions, broken only by the occasional mound of earth or distant hill. I set up my tent, made myself a quick meal, and tried to settle in. The silence here was always heavy, but tonight it felt like something was about to break it. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, though I couldn't see or hear anything unusual. It was just after midnight when I first saw it, a bright light in the sky. At first I thought it was a plane, or maybe a satellite, something that had flown too low. But it wasn't moving like any aircraft I'd seen. It hovered, silent, like it was waiting. I stood frozen, my body suddenly tense, my breath caught in my chest. The light grew brighter, and I swear for a moment it almost seemed to pulse, like it was alive. Then it shot down toward me, faster than anything I could have imagined. I didn't have time to react, to think. The light enveloped me, and I felt my feet leave the ground. It was as if my body was being pulled by an invisible force. I remember trying to scream, but no sound came out. My mind raced, but it felt distant, as if I was drifting between being awake and asleep. I wanted to fight, to run, but my limbs wouldn't obey. Everything went black. I don't know how much time passed before I woke up, but it wasn't like I had simply fallen asleep. My entire body felt different. The air around me was colder, the sounds of the desert were gone. I opened my eyes and found myself in a place that I can't even begin to describe accurately. It wasn't like anything I'd ever seen. The walls were smooth, metallic, and stretched up endlessly into the darkness. There was a low, humming sound that filled the space, like a distant vibration that seemed to come from all around me. I couldn't move at first. My limbs felt heavy, numb, but my mind was clear, and panic began to set in. I looked around, trying to find anything familiar, but all I saw were shadows and strange shapes. Then I saw them. At first, I couldn't process it. There were these figures standing near me, humanoid, but not quite human. Their skin was translucent, almost like I could see through it, and their eyes were enormous. Bigger than any humans, and they seemed to pierce right through me. I remember how cold it felt as they approached me. Their movements were fluid, almost too smooth, like they weren't entirely bound by the same physical laws we are. I couldn't make out any details on their faces, other than those eyes. They were black, like voids, and they didn't blink. I couldn't look away. The more I tried to focus on their faces, the more I felt my own body stiffen, like I was being paralyzed by their gaze. The fear. It wasn't just the kind of fear you feel when you're scared for your life. It was deeper, more primal. It was a sense of being completely out of control, of being insignificant. It's hard to explain, but in that moment, I knew. I wasn't just being watched, I was being studied. I couldn't speak. I wanted to shout, to beg, but nothing came out. My chest was tight, and it was like I couldn't breathe. Then, without warning, I felt something press against my side. I don't know how to describe it, like a sharp, cold sensation running under my skin. It wasn't painful at first, but it was so invasive. I felt my body being probed in ways I didn't have words for. It wasn't physical at first. It was like they were inside my mind, rifling through my thoughts, my memories. I tried to hold on to my sanity, but it was slipping away, and I felt completely exposed. The fear was suffocating. I thought of everything that was familiar, my home, my family, but it all seemed distant, as if it wasn't real anymore, as if they had erased everything that grounded me in the world. And then the pressure inside my head stopped, and I felt the sharp sensation shift. They were placing something inside me, something small and foreign, something that made my body tremble. The feeling of something foreign being inserted into me. It felt like an invasion, but I couldn't stop it. I was powerless. After that, everything went silent again. I remember my eyes flicking around, seeing them still standing there watching me, but it felt like I was becoming numb to them. I was detached, like my own body wasn't mine anymore. The light from before seemed to fill the room once more, and I could see them more clearly now. Their bodies were tall, unnaturally thin, and their skin, if you could even call it that, shimmered faintly. It was like they were not quite real. I know that sounds insane, but that's the only way I can explain it. Like I was looking at something out of a dream, or maybe something that shouldn't even exist. I wanted to scream again, but nothing came out. I was paralyzed with terror, unable to move or even make a sound. It felt like hours, maybe longer. But eventually, one of them took a step toward me, and I felt the ground beneath me shift. It wasn't like gravity had changed, but it was as if the whole space around me warped, and I was being pulled back. Back to where? I don't know. All I know is that the next thing I remember, I was alone, in the desert. I woke up on the ground, face pressed into the dirt, with the cold desert air biting at my skin. The first thing I felt was the intense pressure in my head, like something had been drilled into my skull. My body was trembling uncontrollably, and my mouth tasted like metal, like I had been chewing on something wrong. I couldn't remember how I had gotten there, but I knew instantly that something was horribly, horribly wrong. My clothes were still on, but they felt strange, almost like they didn't fit me properly anymore. I didn't feel like I had been just knocked out. It was like I had been somewhere else entirely, somewhere far from this desert. The memories of those beings, those eyes, flooded back to me with the force of a tidal wave, and I couldn't stop, shaking. I stood up slowly, feeling the earth beneath me, unsure of how I had ended up so far from my tent. I must have been unconscious for hours. There were no lights in the sky anymore. The desert was eerily quiet, as though the world itself had forgotten how to make noise. I don't know how I managed to get back to my car. I remember stumbling, almost blindly, and that's when I noticed something else. The strange, lingering sense of déjà vu. Everything felt familiar, but not in the way it should have. It was like I had lived these moments before. Each step I took, every breath I drew, already happened. I felt like I was reliving something, but I couldn't figure out what. It was maddening. By the time I reached the car, I didn't even know what to do with myself. I was scared to drive, scared that something would happen if I did. But I did. I got in, started the engine, and I left the desert behind. But it wasn't gone. It never left. The nightmares started that night. They weren't like normal dreams. They were vivid, too real, too detailed. I dreamt of landscapes that didn't make sense, of cities in the sky with spires that seemed to reach out into infinity. There were beings, too, tall, thin figures with faces that I couldn't remember, but somehow I still knew them. I saw their eyes over and over. They were always watching, always observing, and I was always being examined. I couldn't escape them. Every time I tried to wake up, I couldn't. It was as if I was trapped, forced to relive it. I even began to see them during the day, out of the corner of my eye. Flickers of movement, shadows that didn't belong. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were still with me, that they were still watching. No matter where I went, no matter how far I traveled, they were always there, lurking, just beyond the edge of my sight. Over the weeks that followed, I couldn't escape the strange sense of being connected to something I couldn't understand. My dreams grew more detailed, more intrusive. I began to hear voices, whispers, that didn't belong to anyone I knew. At first I thought it was just stress or exhaustion, but the longer it went on, the more I realized it was something far worse. The voices weren't just random. They were speaking directly to me. They'd ask questions, sometimes in words I didn't recognize, sometimes in emotions I couldn't put into words. I started researching everything I could about abductions, UFO sightings, and alien encounters. But nothing seemed to make sense. I wasn't just reading stories. I was searching for answers, for something that could explain the sensations I was feeling. And the more I dug, the more isolated I became. I couldn't talk to anyone about it. How do you explain that you've been taken by something not of this world? That you've been branded with something you can't even begin to understand? One night I decided to go back to the desert. I know it sounds insane, but something deep inside me was telling me that I needed to go. That there was something there, something I had missed, something that could make sense of everything that had happened. I drove for hours, The same lonely stretch of road that I had traveled so many times before. The desert was still, but it was no longer comforting. It felt oppressive, like I was being drawn into it, like it was waiting for me to return. When I reached the spot where I'd been taken, I got out of the car, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The air was heavy, and the ground beneath me felt different, like it was pulsing. I stood there, just staring out into the darkness, listening to the silence. But I wasn't alone. The light appeared again. It was faint at first, like a distant star, but it grew quickly, much faster than before. I didn't move. I couldn't. I was frozen in place. As it grew brighter, I felt that same pull, that same sensation of being drawn toward it, as if it was the only thing that mattered. But this time, I didn't feel fear. I felt something else, something more insidious, a sense of inevitability. It was like I was meant to be there, like this was something I couldn't escape. The light hovered above me, and I watched as it expanded, filling the sky. And then, in an instant, I was back where I had been all those years ago, on that cold, metal surface. The figures were there, standing over me again, their eyes wide and empty. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Everything I needed to understand was in those eyes. But now, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't even questioning what was happening. I knew it wasn't the first time. It wouldn't be the last. I woke up again in the desert, disoriented and unable to comprehend what had just happened. But this time, it was different. I felt it. Whatever was inside me, whatever had been done to me, it was shifting. My body felt strange, like it didn't quite belong to me anymore. I could feel the presence of whatever was inside me, like it had rooted itself deep beneath my skin, somewhere I couldn't reach. I felt nauseous, like I was going to be sick, but no matter how much I tried to will myself to throw up, nothing came out. I tried to stand, but I couldn't. My legs were trembling too hard to support me. The car felt miles away, and for a moment I thought I wouldn't make it back. The desert stretched on endlessly, a vast, empty graveyard of sand and silence. But somehow, I made it back to the car, every step more difficult than the last, as if my body was being weighed down by something invisible. When I finally got home, I tried to go back to some semblance of normal life. I threw myself into work, into trying to live my days like I had before all of this started. But I couldn't. I couldn't forget what had happened. The memories weren't fading. They were becoming more vivid, more real. The dreams, the voices, the sense of déjà vu, it all started to blend together. I began to have moments where I couldn't remember what was real and what was a dream. I would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, heart pounding, and I wouldn't be sure if I had been dreaming or if it was happening all over again. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. My thoughts were no longer my own. I tried talking to a therapist, but how do you explain to someone that you've been visited by beings from another world? How do you even begin to tell someone about the feeling of something foreign inside you, controlling you in ways you can't understand? It's been years now, and I still don't have any answers. I still don't know what happened to me that night. I don't know why they chose me or what they wanted, but I know it wasn't a dream. I feel it in my bones, in the back of my mind every single day. I don't know if I'll ever truly understand what happened to me, but I've learned to live with it. I've learned to hide it, to bury it deep down so I can pretend like I'm okay. but I'm not. I don't think I ever will be. The memories come and go, the flashes of those eyes, the pressure inside my head, the strange, unexplainable feelings that still crawl beneath my skin. And I know they're out there, still watching, still waiting. Maybe someday they'll come for me again, or maybe they won't, but I'll never be the same, and neither will the desert. Third story, 1992. It was supposed to be just another day out in the desert, nothing more than a regular photography trip to capture the stunning landscape of the Atacama. I've always loved the isolation of it, the endless dunes, the dry air, and the beauty of a place so far removed from everything. I remember the light, that piercing, almost unnatural light. I'd been photographing some distant peaks when I first noticed it, at the edge of my vision, faint but growing brighter, a glow that seemed out of place in the midday sun. I thought it might have been a trick of the light, maybe a reflection off some rock or a distant flare from the sun, but no, it wasn't. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before. The glow intensified rapidly, and before I knew it, I was completely surrounded. Then I couldn't see. The light was so intense, it felt like it was burning through my retinas, almost blinding me. My head pounded with an ache so sharp I couldn't focus. I stumbled back, my camera forgotten in my hands as I tried to shield my eyes, but there was no escape. I remember the sense of dread slowly creeping in, a gut feeling that something terrible was about to happen. Then, nothing. Just emptiness. The next thing I remember is waking up, but I wasn't where I had been before. I wasn't even in the desert anymore. My surroundings were sterile, cold, metallic, and eerily silent. I couldn't move. I could feel my body, but it felt wrong, almost like it didn't belong to me anymore. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. Panic set in. I was paralyzed, unable to do anything but lay there. That's when I saw them, figures standing at the edge of my vision. They weren't human, not in the way I'd ever understood. Their skin was a strange, reflective silver, almost like polished metal. Their faces were smooth, expressionless, and their eyes. I couldn't see them clearly at first, but I knew they were there, studying me. I wanted to look away, to close my eyes, but I couldn't. I was locked in place, forced to stare at them as they circled me. I could feel their gaze, heavy, like they were looking straight into me, into my thoughts, and I felt small, helpless. The fear I felt, it was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. My heart pounded, but my body wouldn't respond. I tried to call out again, but nothing came. The silence was deafening, more suffocating than the lack of sound should have been. Slowly, one of them moved closer. I could hear the faintest hum, like the sound of electricity in the air, growing louder as they approached. The figure didn't speak, at least not in any way I could understand, but somehow I knew what they wanted. They didn't need words to communicate. There was a clear sense of purpose in their movements. They were studying me. I could see a small metallic device in their hands, something like a needle but longer, thinner, with a series of small lights running along its length. I felt a cold shiver run through me as it came closer to my skin. I had no idea what they planned to do, but I could feel the terror building inside me. I was about to scream in fear when the device touched me. It was cold. It felt wrong, like it didn't belong on my skin. I wanted to pull away, but my body still wouldn't respond. The pain wasn't immediate, but it was there, a dull, aching pressure. The next thing I knew, there was a sharp sting, and then a deep, throbbing ache in my head. It was as if my very brain was being pushed and pulled in different directions. I couldn't think, couldn't focus on anything but the overwhelming pain that seemed to come from every nerve in my body. Time felt like it slowed down, stretching out into an eternity as they moved around me, making quiet, almost musical sounds I couldn't place. As they continued their work, it felt like my body was no longer my own. The pain in my head spread, as if something inside me was being altered, rearranged. I couldn't move or scream, but the sensations were vivid, terrifying. The light around me flickered like the strobe of an old film, constantly shifting, never allowing my eyes to adjust. I felt their presence even when I couldn't see them. Each movement, each shift in the air felt deliberate, calculated. There was something almost clinical in the way they handled me, as though I were no more than an object, a specimen to be studied. I remember trying to focus on something, anything, just to anchor myself to reality, but everything was slipping away. It was like I wasn't entirely in my body anymore, like I was floating just outside of myself, watching this strange, invasive process unfold. I could see the silver-skinned beings moving around, but their movements were so fluid, so unnatural, that it was like they weren't bound by the same laws of physics I understood. I couldn't make sense of what was happening, and that was what scared me most of all. The fear of not knowing, the fear of being powerless in a situation I couldn't even understand. After what felt like hours, maybe days, I was aware of the pressure lifting. I could feel my body again, though it felt wrong, like my skin had been stretched too tight or too loose. I couldn't breathe properly, my chest tight and constricted, my heart still racing as if I'd just run a marathon. My head felt heavy, like something was lodged deep within my skull. When I finally opened my eyes, everything was blurry at first, like waking up from a bad dream. But the dream didn't end. The figures were gone, and in their place there was nothing but the cold, empty space. I couldn't tell how long I'd been out, but the sheer emptiness in the air felt suffocating. Then I noticed it. The marks. Strange, faded patterns on my arms and legs. Lines that didn't belong. They were subtle, almost like tattoos, but not in any way I'd ever seen before. Thin, silver streaks that shimmered slightly in the light. I instinctively reached for my head, but even the touch sent a sharp pain through me. My fingers came away wet, and when I looked down, there was blood on my hands. I couldn't understand what was happening. My brain was struggling to make sense of it all, but the pain, the confusion, was too much. How had I gotten here? What had they done to me? It was only when I managed to pull myself up from the cold metal surface I was lying on that I realized I wasn't alone. There was something else in the room with me, something I hadn't noticed before. A screen, or maybe a window, and through it I could see something. I couldn't make it out at first, but it was like a dark landscape. I remember thinking it looked like the desert, but different, darker somehow, with a strange, unnatural horizon. There were no clouds in the sky, just a deep, black emptiness that stretched for miles. As I tried to get closer, the figures returned. The same beings. They didn't speak to me, but I could feel their presence, the weight of their focus on me. One of them held something up to my face, a small device that emitted a soft, almost imperceptible hum. As soon as it touched my skin, I felt my body tense, and I could swear I heard my own heart skip a beat. I was being measured, examined, recorded. I didn't know how I knew this, but I did. It was like they were collecting data, genetic data, environmental data, like they were studying me the way a scientist would study a specimen in a lab. I wanted to scream, to fight, but all I could do was stand there feeling helpless and small. Time seemed to stretch in impossible ways. I couldn't remember if it had been minutes or hours, but the longer I stayed in that place, the more my sense of reality began to warp. The beings moved around me with an eerie, calm precision, as if everything had been planned, every action deliberate. The silence between us was suffocating, but the hum of their technology filled the air like a distant drone, never quite leaving. At one point, I thought I heard them whispering, or at least I imagined it. I wasn't sure if it was in my mind, or if they were communicating in a way I couldn't understand. But there was something about the way they looked at me. It wasn't hostile, but it wasn't comforting either. It was like I was nothing more than an object to them, something they needed to study, observe, and then discard. I don't know how much time passed before they started taking measurements of my body, my skin, my blood. They used strange instruments I couldn't even begin to describe, things that looked like they didn't belong in any world I knew. Each time one of those devices touched my skin, I felt an unnatural coldness, and the pain from earlier intensified, as if they were taking pieces of me bit by bit. But the worst part, the thing that still haunts me today, was when one of them touched my head. I felt something inside me shift, something deep and unexplainable, as if they were reaching into my thoughts, altering something that had always been there. After what felt like an eternity, the cold, clinical atmosphere began to fade. The beings moved back from me, and I was left in that strange, silent room again. I remember feeling an overwhelming sense of confusion. How had this all happened? How was I supposed to process it? They had done something to me, something I couldn't explain. But before I could ask myself any more questions, I felt myself being lifted. Not physically, no one touched me, but I felt this strange sensation, like gravity was shifting around me, pulling me upwards, pulling me towards something I couldn't see. The walls around me seemed to dissolve, and I was floating, suspended in a space that didn't make sense. My stomach churned with nausea, and the panic returned. I could feel the tightness in my chest again, the sense that something terrible was about to happen. It felt like the world was falling away beneath me, and in that moment I realized I was no longer in control. But before I could react, everything went dark. When I finally regained consciousness, I was lying in the desert again. The air was still and dry, and the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the sand. I had no idea how I got there, how much time had passed, or what had happened. All I knew was that my body was sore, and I could still feel the strange marks on my skin. I looked down at my hands, at the blood. It was still there, dark and sticky. But that wasn't what scared me the most. What terrified me was the overwhelming sense of isolation, of being completely alone. The desert around me was quiet, almost unnervingly so. There was no sign of the figures, no trace of the strange ship that had taken me. It was like none of it had ever happened, and yet I knew it had. I could still feel the memory of their touch, the coldness of their devices, the way they had studied me like an insect in a jar, and those marks on my skin, those silver streaks. They weren't just something I could ignore. They were real, and they were a reminder that something had happened to me, something I couldn't explain. My heart raced, and I felt a knot form in my stomach. The pain in my head was unbearable, a constant throb that wouldn't go away, no matter how much I tried to push it out of my mind. I looked around, expecting to see someone, anything, but there was nothing. Just the vast emptiness of the desert stretching out before me like a void. I don't know how long I lay there, staring at the endless sand. My mind was reeling, struggling to make sense of what had just happened. I should have been relieved, right? I was back, I was alive, but I didn't feel alive. I felt violated. Like something inside me had been taken, and not just physically. I tried to push myself up, but my legs gave way, and I collapsed back onto the ground. The pain in my head was so sharp, it felt like someone was driving nails into my skull. It was all too much. I wanted to scream, to let it all out, but nothing came. The desert air felt suffocating. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, and that's when I noticed something strange. There was dirt, dust, and what looked like blood on my clothes. But there was also something else. Something that didn't belong. A series of small, puncture-like marks on my skin, almost like tiny needle pricks scattered all over my arms and neck. I knew those marks hadn't been there before. It felt like something had been injected into me, something that was still inside. I could feel it, deep under my skin. That cold sensation, the same one I had felt during the whole ordeal. I didn't know what it was, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever they had done, it wasn't over. The marks weren't just a sign of what had happened. They were a reminder. And that feeling of being watched never went away. I don't remember how I made it back to town. I must have walked, though I don't remember the journey. Everything felt like a haze, like I wasn't fully there, like my mind was foggy and distant. When I finally reached the nearest village, I was disoriented, exhausted, and still in shock. I went straight to the local authorities, hoping to get answers, but all they could offer me were confused glances and hushed words. They took me to the hospital, and I underwent a battery of tests, but nothing came back. No signs of physical trauma, no trace of anything unusual. The doctors just shook their heads, told me I was dehydrated, maybe suffering from exhaustion and stress. But I knew better. I could feel what had happened to me, and I could still feel the cold pressure inside my body, like something foreign, something not mine. I didn't know what it was, but it was there. I tried to tell them what happened, but they didn't understand. How could they? They hadn't seen what I had seen. They hadn't felt what I felt. They couldn't explain it. And that's when I started to realize something else. I wasn't the only one who had experienced something like this. There were others, people who had gone missing in the desert, people who had come back with strange stories, just like mine. I started looking for answers on my own, seeking out ufologists, paranormal researchers, anyone who might believe me. I found a few people who were willing to listen, who took my story seriously. Some even said they had heard similar accounts from other people who had experienced abductions. But there was no evidence, no hard proof. Just a series of missing persons cases, strange lights in the sky, and rumors about the desert. I felt frustrated, helpless. No one was going to believe me. The government wasn't going to investigate. My friends and family were terrified for me, but they couldn't understand. How could they? What could I show them? A few marks on my skin? A headache that wouldn't go away? It wasn't enough to convince anyone. And so the story faded. People forgot. I was left alone with my memories, with the pain in my head and the marks on my body that never seemed to heal. To this day, I still don't have answers. I don't know what they wanted from me, what they did to me, or why they chose me. All I know is that I was there, in that place, with those beings, and whatever they did to me, it wasn't just physical. It was deeper than that. I can still feel it in the quiet moments, in the silence of the night when everything is still. I hear their whispers, faint but distinct, as if they're trying to reach me again, trying to communicate. Maybe they're still watching, still studying me. Maybe they've moved on, but I can't shake the feeling that I'm still a part of whatever experiment they were conducting. And the worst part is that I have no way to prove any of it, no evidence, just my word. And that's not enough. People think I'm crazy. They think I'm just a man with a weird story and nothing to back it up. But I know what I experienced. I feel it in my bones. And every night, I wonder if they'll come back, if they'll return for me again. I don't talk about this much, and I haven't shared this story with many people. I don't know why I'm sharing it here, but I guess it's because the memories are getting harder to ignore. I've been trying to move on, to live my life like I did before, but it's not the same. I can't forget what happened. It's always there, lurking in the back of my mind, waiting for the moment when I'll remember something else, something even more terrifying than what I've already experienced. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, hearing that hum in the air like they're still out there, hovering just beyond my reach. And I don't know if I'm ever going to get over it. What happened to me, what they did to me, it's not something I can explain, not something I can just let go of. It's a part of me now, and I don't know if I'll ever be free from it. I still don't understand why they chose me, why I was taken. I wish I could say it was some kind of bad dream, something I imagined in a panic. But I know it wasn't. It was real. Too real. I've tried to go back to the desert, but the moment I set foot on that sand, the memories come rushing back, and I have to leave again. I can't stay there. Not with the feeling that they're still watching, still studying. I don't know if I'll ever be able to shake it off, or if I'll ever get the answers I'm looking for. But I do know one thing. Whatever happened to me out there in the Atacama, it's changed me, and I don't think I'll ever be the same again.